So we'll get started. I'm sure some folks will be rolling in. For the conversational portion of this event, please use the Q&A box to ask any questions, and we'll use that to moderate. Welcome everyone to January 2021 Coffee and Conversations. We're so glad to have you with us, even virtually, as we've been doing for most of the past year. And we are really excited today to have Dr. Nadine Petty with us. And I will turn it over to the Carsey School Director, Michael Ettlinger, to introduce Dr. Petty.
Hi, welcome everybody, and thank you, Jordan. It's an honor and a privilege to welcome Dr. Nadine Petty this morning. She's the Chief Diversity Officer and Associate Vice President for Community, Equity, and Diversity at the University of New Hampshire. I'll give a short version of her impressive life and career. I encourage you to read the longer version online. Dr. Petty earned her bachelor and master degrees at the University of Rochester. She has her PhD in educational leadership and organizational development with an emphasis in post-secondary education. That's from the University of Louisville. Prior to coming to UNH, I guess 5 months ago, seems like a lot's happened in the last 5 months. Prior to that, Dr. Petty served as the executive director of the Center for Diversity and Enrichment at the University of Iowa, where she led a large team of staff dedicated to the success of students with marginalized identities. Overall, she has spent 20 years in the education field. More broadly, she has devoted herself to a wide range of diversity and social justice causes and endeavors through teaching, serving on and leading various committees and boards, creating and strengthening services for individuals and with marginalized identities, and providing numerous workshops and trainings to students, colleagues, and community members. So with that, I'll hand it off to Nadine Petty. Thank you, Nadine.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. So welcome, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm really honored to take part in the Carsey School's Coffee and Conversation. So the one thing I wish is that I was a coffee drinker. I am not a coffee drinker, but I do have my bottled water, so I will be taking multiple sips of that as we move through this process. And so just give me a minute to share my screen. I do have a short presentation as we engage in this concept of anti-racism and how public institutions can be anti-racist. There we are. Okay. And we can see the screen, just a head nod for those I can see. Yes, wonderful. All right, so how to be an anti-racist public institution. So the first thing I thought when I was putting this presentation together is, I know that there is a lot of people on this call, but I really don't know where everyone is sort of in their journey and in their educational status or in their knowledge or understanding of what anti-racism is. And so therefore I wanted to present everyone with some definitions of anti-racism, right? And so we're gonna start off with Wikipedia, because we know Wikipedia is the academic source for everyone involved, right? And so Wikipedia basically says that anti-racism refers to a form of action against racial hatred, bias, systemic racism, and the oppression of marginalized groups. Okay, and another definition by Dr. Robert Patterson says that anti-racism is an active and conscious effort to work against multidimensional aspects of racism. And then there are two definitions by Ibram Kendi. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with Ibram Kendi, he is the author of the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And if you have not read it, I do recommend it. So he says that to be anti-racist is to admit being racist, which seems a little contradictory, but I'll explain that in a minute. To be anti-racist is to admit being racist, and then anti-racism is not who you are as a person, but what you are doing in the moment. And so essentially what those last two quotes mean is that according to Kendi, no individual is actually racist or not racist, right? We simply do or say racist things or support racist doctrines at times. And so anti-racism is simply being able to catch ourselves, to recognize when we are being racist, and to interpret that, to interrupt that, to pivot, and to choose not to be racist, right? And so essentially We say things, we do things. Sometimes it could be in a joke, in a conversation with family members. And it's just to be mindful and to consciously not do that, or to catch yourself doing that and then go the other way. And so when you look at these quotes, right, when I look at these quotes, I see something in common. And that actually, I was been doing research on this and just looking at what really anti-racism means in general. And the one consistent thing is really action, right? And so to be an anti-racist public institution simply means that the institution has to be willing to take action. The institution has to be willing to be mindful. The institution has to be conscious and to put effort and work in. So that being said, there are many trends for anti-racism in public institutions. There's this company called EAB, and EAB is a educational sort of best results firm. And this company did some research, and this is what most of, or a lot of this presentation is based on. So it's based on research from this company, in addition to my own expertise and my own experiences, and some of the research I've done on my own as well. And so we know that late last year, so it was May of 2020, George Floyd was tragically and actually quite publicly killed by Minneapolis police. And so that sparked a national outrage, right? And it focused the attention of many public institutions towards a deeper commitment to diversity and inclusion and anti-racism. And so what we saw were a lot of public institutions, particularly institutions of higher ed, colleges and universities, were embracing and engaging with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and with anti-racism in ways that we haven't seen before. And so as a result of this growing attention to anti-racism, this EAB conducted the study, and this was about the summer of 2020, so it was maybe 2 or 3 months after the George Floyd incident. So they analyzed 130 different higher education diversity statements, racial justice statements, and racial justice practices in the US and also in Canada. And so from that research, they came across some trends and some very common things and some very consistent things that these public institutions were doing. And so what you see in front of you, this bulleted list, is essentially what they came up with. So much of this probably will not be of a surprise, but some of it in some ways is. And so I'm gonna go through that for a minute. And so first and foremost, creating strategic diversity plans, and public institutions who want to be anti-racist, they have strategic diversity plans. It's foundational. It's sort of your roadmap, essentially, to being anti-racist and to improving culture within a space. Creating centralized resource repositories. We saw that many institutions were able to put together anti-racist material, just materials on social justice or anything that would promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in this space, and have it in one spot that their stakeholders could assess as needed. Next, there was a lot of establishing of research or policy centers. And so a couple examples is the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where they committed $1 million to address systemic racism, educational equity, and also to reduce health disparities, right, based on race. And so this money was really going to go into some of the more social justice and community-oriented pieces. And then Roanoke College also created a Center for Studying Structures of Race to study the legacies of slavery in modern society. Institutions also started to evaluate relationships with public services, in particular and specifically relationships with their local and also their institutional police forces or law enforcement areas. And what we saw were that police departments started looking at how they were policing, and institutions started looking at how they were policing students, and particularly how they were policing BiPOC community members. There was more attempt for engagement, for community engagement, for building relationships, right? Building relationships with community members and also with students within institutions of higher education. And also we saw an increased interest in diversity education and diversity training in general from various police forces, that are specifically ones that were housed within like public safety that were housed specifically within colleges and universities. Another trend is an acknowledgement of past complicity, right? So every institution, we have a history, and some of our history, just in America, some of our history is just not so great, not so positive. And so we see a trend where institutions are stepping forward and saying, hey, this is our past, this is our legacy, and we'd like to pivot from that past and legacy. And specifically, one example is William and Mary. And so William and Mary is actually currently engaged in a fundraising process, and they hope to take that money to build a memorial to acknowledge their history of and their role in slavery, as an example. And so we've seen a lot of task forces being established, a lot of town halls and listening sessions being held. Some institutions formalized the celebration of Juneteenth. Anti-racism trainings where there was an uptick, and for institutions who hadn't done it before, they started looking into doing it. People of color recruitment and retention, specifically with faculty, we see an uptick in that as well with institutions. Developing and expanding resources for BiPOC stakeholders, this was a huge one. These resources were tied a lot to like counseling services, mental health support, in addition to programming, affinity-specific programming across institutions, things like employee resource groups, and so forth. And then also we saw an initiative to develop and improve local and regional community partnerships, which was huge. And so we were seeing institutions reaching into BiPOC communities in ways that we haven't seen before, in order to find out essentially what the communities needed, and for the communities, the institutions to be able to provide that, but also to try to build and to foster relationship and to build trust with the communities and where they were situated as well. And so putting the research aside, and that was a lot, it was a mouthful, there are some gaps that I noticed when I was looking through the research and looking through the trends that were found. And so what I've come up with on this slide really is essentially additional suggestions, right? So things that I know from my own experience and from my own work that is useful for institutions that are trying to be more anti-racist in their approach and to have more inclusive cultures. And so first and foremost, and this is key, really is to understand how and where racism shows up, right? So what this means really is to pay attention to policy, pay attention to processes, pay attention to hiring practices. I mean, you name it, it really is about taking apart every aspect of what we do day to day within our institutional lives and to really examine it for troubling and potential areas, right? And so we have to see where it shows up, recognize it, and then confront it. So not only identify it, confront it. And the confronting piece is part of that action. That really is where the anti-racism comes in, because anti-racism is not passive. It is not just saying, oh yeah, you know, we have a problem. It really is saying, we have a problem, now we're going to do something about it. It's the doing that is the anti-racism, right? So once things are identified, the inequities, the disparities, what becomes important is to address it, but to address it by centering the needs of the BiPOC individuals and BiPOC communities. One of the things that's important to avoid in anti-racist approaches is if you are a member of a majority group, so if you identify as white in a particular space, is to fall into this trap of no matter how well-intentioned you may be, no matter how much of this work you may be engaged in, is to fall into the trap of believing that you know everything, right? Because that's not the case. No one knows everything. And this is why working in community and collaboratively is the best way to approach anything. But it really is that taking a step back and listening to what members of the BiPOC population is saying to us, taking that information and then using that information to shape action going forward. Accountability is also huge, right? Who's going to be accountable? Holding leadership accountable and leadership taking accountability is huge. And then the last two kind of go together, right? And so the change-making process, again, the action piece of it, being able to engage in that in a meaningful way, and then creating opportunities for stakeholders to take part in that action. So before I mentioned that one of the trends in public institutions, particularly higher education, is anti-racist or diversity education, right? But so what happens after we're educated? So we attend trainings, we engage in, it could be a cohort model training, we engage in this growth process, and then now we have all this information and oftentimes this passion to do something, but where do we go to do this? And so creating opportunities to make a difference, for individuals to make a difference in their communities, for individuals to make a difference in the institutions in which they are working, is going to be extremely important. If they don't exist already, then creating them. Again, because the action piece is what's important with anti-racism. And so that brings me to UNH particularly, and talking about some of the anti-racist commitments at the UNH and within my office. And so before I start, this is cherry picked, right? Because there are tons and tons and tons and tons of initiatives happening at the institution right now. And I'm really happy to say that I'm really encouraged by what I've seen as a lot of people coming together to do this work and to do this work in very mindful and meaningful ways. And so I just cherry picked 4 areas because I only have an hour and I do want to allow time for Q&A and the conversational piece. And so one of the things that we're doing at UNH is creating a targeted hiring framework. And so this framework right now is addressed towards faculty in particular. And essentially what it is, it's a framework that is data driven. It's a data driven approach where departments who are hiring are looking at data, they're looking at past trends, they're looking at the diversity makeup of past applicant pools, and they're using all these metrics to come up with diversity criteria for current searches. And so that looks different again, depending on the department, but essentially to keep this higher level, it's to help diversify faculty pools and to help reach the goal, the strategic goal of diversifying faculty in general across the institution. Now, we're right now in a pilot stage. It's alive and well, and what we do hope to do is to expand this to staff moving forward, which is what I say hope, but we're going to expand this to staff moving forward. And so a part of this new diversity hiring framework is also a diversity scorecard, which departments are using to really assess where they are, right? To assess how inclusive they are, to assess their readiness for diversity hires. Because it's one thing really to hire diverse individuals into a space, it's another thing to be able to retain. And so for me, really my biggest stance, and this has been the stance of leadership as well at UNH, is that we have to be able to retain the individuals that we hire. I mean, it doesn't make any good business sense not to do so, right? Because there's a lot of work that goes into recruiting and hiring. So the next thing that we're working on at UNH really is increasing opportunities for education. And this is one of the trends that came up in the research that was done with EAB. And so increasing opportunities for education looks a lot of different ways for us. And so not only is it increasing the number of opportunities for training and education, but it's also creating difference in the types of trainings that are available to UNH members of the community. And so specifically, so I'm gonna take this time for a shameless plug. So I'm gonna give you some examples of some of the trainings that we are working on, and hope that for some of you on this call that you may be able to participate in some of them. And so the first one really is our social justice education program. The social justice education program is a program out of the Office of Community Equity and Diversity, and it's led by Allison Ryder. And so Allison has done a wonderful job of coordinating this. And so essentially, it's a group of volunteers. I'm using the word volunteers. They do get a small stipend, but it's mostly, it's volunteer work, because I don't think we could ever pay anyone what they're really worth when they're doing this type of work. But these social justice educators go through a training course. So they attend a course and they essentially learn the skills that they need in order to then become trainers for different social justice topics across UNH. And so they partner with our office. We partner with other offices. It's extremely collaborative. And so this program is going to be grown. And so right now we're offering a session. It's a session to learn the fundamentals of social justice education. And so anyone who has any questions about that, who may be interested in that, should contact Allison Ryder, Alllyson, in the Office of Community Equity and Diversity. Next, we have Alumni Relations is hosting an in-depth on inclusion series. And the next series is called Ending Polite Silence. And a panel of UNH alumni are going to be discussing structural isms that show up for Black women in and out of the workplace. And so the participants will receive cultural competency strategies to support colleagues who identify as Black women. And so if this is an interest of yours, if you have colleagues who are Black women, if you feel like you want to do more, again, it's the action, right? The action is what is anti-racist. Then that will take place January 21st from 12 to 1. Feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to share the flyer and also the registration information that's on the flyer if you're interested. And then we have also been at UNH tapping into a lot of external trainers, again, to broaden the type of topics that are offered at the institution. And so Kate Slater is one of those trainers, and she's currently at Brandeis as an assistant dean in the graduate college. And so she'll be offering a educational series. It's a 3-part series called The Smog We Breathe: How White Identified People Can Engage in Anti-Racism. And so that first series begins January 19th from noon to 1:30. The second is February 2nd and then February 16th at the same time. Again, reach out to me, I'll be happy to share that information. And then lastly, UNH, our office has been partnering across campus more deliberately. And so one example of that is a partnership with CETL, which is a Center for Education and Innovation in Teaching. And Allison Ryder again and Carsey Owens Vasquez, who is our director of the Beauregard Center, will be partnering to do a workshop with CETL on January 21st called Tangible Strategies for Decolonizing the Classroom. And so those are some examples. And as you can see, they're really varied. There's plenty more going on. And so this is not, I can't mention all of them. And so if I didn't mention it, it doesn't mean it's not important. It just means I picked the ones that I thought were representative of a kind of a broader idea of where it is that we're going. I'm almost done, I promise. I've got like 5 more minutes. So the next anti-racist commitment example at UNH is really that we're assessing, identifying gaps, and we're addressing that. We're assessing everything. We're looking at our policies, our protocols, our student rights and responsibilities, and our student life area. I mean, our bias response. In particularly, we have identified gaps in our bias response system and protocol. And so right now we are revamping that system. And so I'm happy to say that pretty soon, and I say within the next month or 2, we're going to be rolling out a new software, a new reporting system that's going to help with the communication between those who are filing incidences of bias with us and the offices that are responsible for handling those incidences of bias. And then lastly, we are increasing opportunities for funding that's tied to anti-racist initiatives. And specifically within the Office of Community Equity and Diversity, 2 funds have been set up in partnership with the Office for Investment. One is a DEI Strategic Initiatives Fund, right? And this fund will support just the President's strategic initiatives, the President's diversity initiatives, any kind of campus-wide DEI endeavor. And so it can go towards faculty and staff professional development in this area. It can go towards hiring initiatives in this area, curriculum development, social justice education, any related program, you name it, that's what that fund can support. And then we've also set up the Wanda Mitchell Diversity Recruitment and Retention Fund, which is going to be student specific. And that fund is going to go towards things like scholarships, financial support for students who find themselves in a little bit of a hairy situation while going through their process here at UNH. So it's going to support overall student retention. There are many other initiatives at UNH, and again, I'll be happy to engage anyone in this call, in a conversation about what those initiatives are. I am putting together a comprehensive list of initiatives at UNH to share more broadly down the road, and so that's also forthcoming. And so with that, I am going to stop talking and I'm going to open the floor up to Jordan so that we can begin the conversational Q&A piece, because I am very excited to engage with all of you today.
Awesome. Thank you, Nadine.
Yeah.
This is great. And I've already seen here in the questions, a lot of folks are asking, can they get a copy of the presentation? You know, can they get a link for some of the series you mentioned? Are folks able to find that on your website? Or
So one of them, the Kate Slater's workshop is on my website. The other two are not. The social justice one is, the one with the alumni relations is not. And so please feel free to reach out to me, nadine.petty@unh.edu. I will send that to you. Yeah, if you can't find it, I will send it to you, whatever it is that you need. And as far as the copy of the presentation, I can send it as well. Jordan, the copy I sent you is not the updated version. I actually updated it last night, so I do have an updated version, which is the one that I showed today. But yeah, reach out and I can send a copy as well.
Perfect. That sounds great. And we'd be happy if you'd like to post the slides and any other links you'd like on our Coffee and Conversations webpage. Since this is recorded, folks can feel free to share this as well. This will get posted on the Carsey Coffee and Conversations page. So. Yeah. So people will be able to visit.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So some other questions here. So we have a question from an anonymous attendee saying, you know, they've heard expressed from some of their Asian friends that they feel excluded from the term BiPOC. And so the question is, have you been made aware of that concern? And maybe for some of the folks that aren't familiar with, you know, POC or BiPOC, could you talk a little bit about, you know, what that means, how that's broken down, why we're centering BiPOC versus POC?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So POC, people of color, is essentially what it sounds like. So it could be any individual who's not identifying as white. And so people of color traditionally would include Asian and Asian identifying populations. And so BiPOC came into being actually quite recently, and it means Black and Indigenous people of color. And the reason that that term has been starting to be used is because research has been showing that, in general, Black and Indigenous peoples who identify as being people of color have a unique set of experiences in this country that others may not be having. And that's not to say that, for example, Asian populations are not having experiences. Certainly they're experiencing xenophobia, particularly when COVID hit. And so I do want to put that out there and acknowledge that. So that's really where the term is. It really was to center those who have really historically kind of been challenged by this country. So yes, and to answer the question, yes, I am absolutely aware of that exclusion as a result of that. And so, but that is why it's being said, and that is where it comes from. That's where it comes from. But again, I will say that from my standpoint, when we're talking about diversity and we're talking about inclusion, I look at diversity in its broadest sense, right? And so that includes just everyone. It includes everyone. In addition, majority group individuals. And so I see diversity in a spectrum. It's sexual orientation, it's like marital status, it's first generation status, it's income status, it's really everything, because all of us together is what really builds a learning community. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure.
Another question here. So when BiPOC faculty and staff leave UNH under troubled circumstances, there's little effort made to help the institution understand what happened and how to address the problems. Instead, we are told it's a personnel matter that is none of our business. We cannot learn from mistakes that are covered up. So not exactly a question, but sort of this person's experience. Have you seen that in your time here at UNH, and is that being addressed?
So, yeah, but it's not a cover up. So I understand. I absolutely understand the sentiment behind the question, and so and it's a good, or the statement. And it's a good statement to make. And so essentially, when things occur at this institution or any institution, I've been at many, and it operates the same way. When it's an HR matter, it is essentially an HR matter, and there's legal reasons why institutions cannot be very public about things that occur. It's just legality. It's just legality. And so it's not covering it up. It really is just adhering to what the law says we can or cannot do, or can or cannot say in any particular circumstance. And I know that it can feel a certain way, right? Particularly when someone's invested in what's occurred, someone wants to find out, and even just from a learning standpoint, as the individual who made the statement said. But I mean, it's just, we can't break the law, right? We don't want to break the law, but that puts us at risk in all kinds of ways. And we certainly want to be able to allow individuals to go through due process and to adhere to guidelines that we are supposed to adhere to, HR specific as an institution as well. So, but yeah, it's not covering up, it's doing what we're supposed to be doing. But again, I know it can feel a certain way to individuals on the other end of it. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a helpful distinction. And yeah, the legality with HR and those requirements, I'm sure when that meets up against other values of transparency and wanting to care for people, when those come into conflict, I'm sure I'm sure it's challenging for any institution, including UNH.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question here. Is the EAB research, is that publicly available?
Yeah, it is. It should be. Yes, it is publicly available. EAB.com/research. If you go into the EAB homepage, you can click all through that. And there's all kinds of information there, including articles they've published, including their services and so forth. So yes.
Awesome. We have another person here who said, great presentation. They'd like to ask a question. Please type it in the Q&A box if you have a specific question for us. Another question here. As a faculty member trying to bring racial justice elements into my classroom, who or where are the best resources for finding information to support this endeavor at UNH?
To bring, I'm sorry, Jordan, repeat that question.
So as a faculty member trying to bring racial justice elements into the classroom, is there a, or who, I guess it says who or where are the best resources for finding information to support this kind of work?
Yeah, that's great. So I've got two answers for that. The first answer would be the Office of Community Equity and Diversity. So that would be on my office. Allison Ryder, again, does the social justice and racial justice work. She does most of the education here for faculty and staff at UNH. And so that would be one resource. Myself is another resource. I would also check with the library. The main library has lots of resources tied to racial justice and anti-racism as well. And they're a wonderful, wonderful wealth of information. So those two places is where I would begin and start.
Great, thank you. And I'll second that. The folks at the library are great.
Yeah.
Another question, how do these initiatives that UNH is working on right now and that your office is working on, how does that differ from some of the affirmative action programs from this person is referencing from like the early 1970s?
That's a really good question. So the 1970s, the affirmative action programs, so I would say this is how it differs. And so I will look particularly with the hiring, right? The intentional hiring and trying to diversify our faculty ranks. And so the affirmative action policies really, in a lot of ways, were coined as reverse discrimination. I don't know if you remember that from that time in that language. And it was coined as that because it seemed to set up this idea that we were going to hire someone simply because of their color, because of their background, in order to meet whatever end goal we have. But that's not what we're doing here at UNH, right? So what has been very clear, I've been very clear about, what HR has been very clear about in all the conversations I've had with our search chairs and the committees, is that we cannot, nor should we, hire someone simply because of their race and their background. That is not the point. What we're doing essentially is diversifying the pool to increase the likelihood and the opportunities for individuals who are qualified for the position to in fact make it to the final round and in fact be hired into the positions. And so the questions I've been asked, actually, I'd be very specific about this. Questions have been asked more than once about the rubrics that the search committees use to rate candidates. And one of the questions that came up multiple times within multiple departments was, can we use race as a checkpoint? Can we give someone a point, for example, if they're Black or Latinx? And my answer unequivocally has been no. I mean, we cannot, because that is not what we're doing. And so that is the difference, I would say. with what we're doing in the direction we're going in and what's happened in the past with affirmative action initiatives.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mhm.
So this actually kind of follows up here, this next question. Paula is curious about the departmental scorecard you mentioned, and whether that's something like that is available for non-faculty departments.
Yes, as a matter of fact, that scorecard, it's extremely comprehensive scorecard. So it's not a card, it's like an 80-something page document, but it's wonderful. It's tied to tested and true, right? And so there is a higher ed version, which is a version that we're using for our purposes. And there's also a business, sort of a non-faculty, like non-higher ed version. And either or, both versions are fine to use. And I do have access to both. If anyone is interested, again, they can reach out and I can share either one. The higher ed one is not necessarily specific to faculty. What it is it just talks more about what higher ed benchmarks should look like. And so you can use it if you're a staff member running a department. Yeah, so it's not just tied to the academic world specifically. So yeah, it's comprehensive in that way and universal in that way. It's actually also used by businesses, not just higher ed, across globally, right? It's a sort of global benchmarks. It's extremely useful. Yeah.
That's great. That's interesting. I didn't know about that. And I'm sure that there are probably different requirements for a public institution as opposed to a private business. There are different considerations, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Another question here from Jennifer. New Hampshire is one of a few states that does not uphold affirmative action. This challenges many anti-racism actions at UNH. What is UNH doing to encourage lawmakers to change this or to potentially push the envelope?
Yeah, that's $1 million question. Thank you for that one. Yeah, so I will say there are individuals, without naming names, there are individuals that I'm aware of at UNH. We have had conversation who are tied into the state and state policy, who are actively working and having conversations with lawmakers about making changes to policy. And so that's the best that I can say. It is not necessarily institutionally driven. So I don't want to put that and say it's institutionally driven, because I would say that's not the case. It's more individuals within the institution recognizing the need and then kind of taking on the gambit to do so. Yeah.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah. And it's not an easy task, right? Not at all. And so, more power to them. It's rough. It's rough, but it's important.
Yeah. Thank you. Another question here. What do you see as the first steps for an internal UNH or departmental organization for reviewing its hiring and onboarding processes for implicit bias?
What are the first steps for an internal?
Yeah, so let me see if I can reword this here. So what do you, so if a UNH department or any organization wants to review its hiring and onboarding processes for implicit bias, what are some of the first steps that they should take?
Yeah, so the education piece is going to be the first step. I think you need to know what you're looking for first and foremost. And so I would say, engage in as much implicit bias education as possible so that you can spot it when you see it. I think most people have a general understanding of what it is, but when you delve into it and really get into the weeds, it's much broader and much more insidious than we would ever imagine. And so for that reason, many trainings. So the Gear Up training is a good start. It's a good start. It's a good foundational. Yashwant Diaz has been invited to do implicit bias training at the institution. He did one from the University of Iowa. He did one in October. It was October, and he has another one scheduled for February. I know he's also doing one for the law school. His is extremely thorough, and it's 4 hours long. It's well worth the time to attend for that reason, right? And so when we start to advertise for that, I would say jump on board and do that. And so it's the educational piece so that you know what you're looking for, and that's the first step. I would also say that make sure that whoever's going through the process to try to find the implicit bias, make sure that there's some sort of think very carefully about the makeup of the individuals who are looking through that. And so make sure that you have people of color, make sure that you have LGBTQ identifying people, make sure that you have, people who might have disabilities. So what you're looking for are different lenses on that information, because the more varied lenses that you have is a greater chance that you're going to have also being able to identify where there are problematic areas. And that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Another question here. So UNH is an institution that is always mindful of money and lack of budget resources. Is there a way to continue conversations about anti-racist work which feel shut down by comments about not having the money for that?
Yes, because the truth is, when an institution values something, the budget will be there to take care of it. I mean, that is the absolute truth. And even in a budget crisis, I've worked for many different institutions we've gone through many budget ups and downs for various reasons over the last however many, years. And what has always been the case is that an institution finds money for what they believe is important. And so regardless of the budget crisis that we may be in, if we are saying as an institution that diversity, equity, and inclusion, that anti-racism, that all of this is important to us as an institution, that it's something that we value, then we're going to be able to find the money. And if we don't find the money, as far as it's not state funding, then we will find it through donor and corporate funding. In other words, we will fundraise and the money will be there as needed, and that support for fundraising will also be there. We see it now, right? Because I just mentioned the two different accounts that were set up in my office. That's donor supported, and we had a drive. It was Giving Tuesday, and we did a very good job of collecting funding for those two. And it was just a first initial funding round. And we have many donors, many individuals who are interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion stepping forward and wanting to assist and wanting to help in this way as well. And so the conversation moves forward regardless of what might be happening, even with state funding and state budgets.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Well, it's great to know that so many folks are stepping up and making that commitment to help the university do that work.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Another question here. There's so much for primarily white institutions to do to be anti-racist institutions. And while we see more schools hiring chief diversity officers, in your opinion, what is the most important thing for a school to do before it hires a CDO? And how can faculty and staff build a strong foundation for success so that person can hit the ground running? And in UNH's case, to support the work that you and your office are doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for the first part of the question, for any institution wanting to hire a CDO, in particular, if it's a new position and it's something being created to support this type of work, I would say that the institution would need to be prepared essentially to get out of that CDO's way. And I know that sounds harsh. Hire the individual and let them do their job. It's just that simple. I have seen multiple cases where CDOs are hired and they're, every initiative, there's resistance, there's pushback, there's, everything that needs to be done, this person has to fight just to move the needle. So if you are ready to hire a CDO, my statement will be, you're also saying that you are ready to stand out of their way and allow them to do their job, because a committee has come together and identified someone as having the expertise and the skill sets to move the institution in the direction that that institution wants to move in. And so that would be the first thing. And the second part of the question had to do with, was it UNH specifically? What can you?
Yeah. How can faculty and staff build a strong foundation for success so that person can hit the ground running?
Oh, yes. And so faculty and staff, as individuals, as part of the community of the institution, can start working individually on themselves, but also in their sort of milieu, right? Whatever department, whatever unit they're in. And so if you're on a committee, how do you diversify that committee? How do you bring conversations of anti-racism into that committee? How do you embed it into the culture? So here's what you don't want to have happen. So you don't want to have an institution relying on just the CDO to do the work, because that person is not going to be successful and the institution in and of itself is not going to change, right? There may be small successes here or there, but ultimately there's not going to be success and there's not going to be movement in the direction that an institution would want to go. And so it really has to be individual faculty and staff members doing their own work personally, doing the work for their units personally. So then that builds onto what the CDO comes in and wants to help achieve, working with the president and the provost and whoever else may be on board for this. And so it's not a one-person job by any means. So I always use the metaphor of everyone grabbing an oar and rowing that boat in the same direction. That is immensely, immensely important for success.
Great, thank you. I like that metaphor.
Yeah, and I'm not a rower, so I don't know how I came up with it, but I always just think about crew, the cruise ships rowing, everyone just rowing that boat in the same direction.
Another question here. Is there any way for the community to learn from the experiences of BiPOC people who leave that would not be infringing on their legal right to confidentiality? So sort of related to that earlier question about folks leaving the institution. Yes,
and so one way that could be done is, when exit interviews are conducted, if HR gathered all that information in disaggregated form, so it's just, here are why individuals are leaving, but it's not tied to any specific person. So it just becomes like a thematic report. Then I don't believe that that would infringe on anyone's right? Because here are just some examples. Here's what we've collected over the last 5 years. We could do something like that, and that would absolutely keep us copacetic from legal standpoint.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. And this follow-up question is also sort of related to the point. This person says, I agree with the point about retention, as I have seen many employees of color leave UNH. How will POC staff members be supported if they experience any kind of microaggression or have experienced racist actions? Who or what department can they reach out to?
Yeah, so staff, just like students and faculty, can report any incidents of bias or unfair treatment or what have you, treatment that is targeted based on identity through the reported system. And so that's going to go through the Office of Affirmative Action and Equity, AAEO, the Affirmative Action and Equity Office, headed by Donna Marie Sorrentino. And so once that bias report is filed, then that office does their due diligence and tries to find out sort of what's what. And so, yeah, that would be the thing that you would do, is to file it, to report it. You could also reach out to me, and some individuals have reached out to me just for initial conversations. Sometimes it's just about support. Sometimes individuals don't want to file, they just want to talk through circumstances. And so for that talking through, I'm available. There's also employee assistance program, which is like sort of, counseling and support for individuals who are going through things as well. And so there's various options that can be taken, just depending on what an individual's need is or where they are in that particular space or in that particular moment. But yeah, formalized reporting, and then also support through my office and also through EAP, I would say, are the top three.
Great, thank you. Another question here. Is your office, or UNH more broadly, considering extending the reach of your work into more of the colleges, centers, units in a formal way, beyond things like having representatives on a committee, or for example, things like having a fellow or other staff or faculty member who carries out your work at lower levels, but perhaps with more presence or authority?
Yes. Big capital YES, yes. We've had conversations. So my office has had conversations about fellows and what that might look like. We are having one actually from the Sustainability Institute join us. And so that is something that's sort of already in play. I've had conversations about it, what it might look like from an academic standpoint. There's a lot to go into it, but so yes, without going into too much. I'm just excited to see what that might look like and excited about partnering with individuals. And so if you're asking the question because you're in an academic unit and you're interested, again, email me, and I'm saying this when I have 100 emails, but please reach out to me if this is something that you're interested in with your unit doing, because I'd be happy to talk to you about what that might look like as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Another question here. Are there common retention issues for BiPOC faculty, staff, and students?
Yeah. So the issues look different depending on whether one's a faculty member, a staff member, or a student. But I would say that ultimately they point to the same thing, right? And so we have, I'll start with students. For our BiPOC students who decide to leave the institution, it can be for various reasons, and there are various reasons, but what we're seeing with some of the conversation really are just the students not feeling like they're part of the UNH community, or the students engaged or experiencing unwelcoming behavior by other students, by peers, particularly when it has to do with roommate to roommate circumstances. And then students experiencing sometimes this feeling of not being supported, right? Not being supported when things actually occur. And so we do need to do better as an institution, which is part of why some of those changes with that bias reporting is occurring. Is to really address what we've been hearing, and what I've been hearing in particular is to try to shore some of those gaps up. So that feeling of not being supported and that feeling of, you know, not being welcomed can sometimes, when I've talked to a few faculty that are here, faculty of color, but faculty of color who have also left, because I reached out to them. I just wanted to know why they left, and they were willing to have a conversation with me about it. And so some of that also plays itself back out to feelings of, again, not being included, sometimes feelings of aggressiveness and toxicity in some spaces, but others have left for reasons completely outside of that. Others have left simply because they were offered more money someplace else, and they were offered more incentives someplace else. And so competitively, we may have to start looking at, for faculty in particular, how we can compete when we have a faculty member of color who is, you know, they're getting offers all over the place. You know, how do we compete with some of these other institutions with compensation packages? And so that's going to be something that we have to look at as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, here's another question. So how can DEI work be rewarded or encouraged at UNH among faculty and staff? This person says service work is often not rewarded, and especially not encouraged among pre-tenure faculty, and staff are not given the time to engage.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's a question that the President's Leadership Committee has actually tossed around. And we talked about it during a retreat we had in August. It's come up again in various conversations, questions about whether or not we add that service piece actually as a requirement for the tenure process has come up. There have been all kinds of questions. We haven't, unfortunately, have not landed on anything specific. We have not landed on the ability to change the tenure process as of now, or to implement that, but just know that it is on our radars, and our being the deans and the powers that be. It's on our radars. Conversations have been happening and continue to happen, and we are trying to work through that and to figure that out. And so, yeah, it's a tough one, right? It is a tough one, because we know that some supervisors don't provide release time for trainings, particularly when they happen between the 8 to 5 hours. We are building in an accountability structure for our leadership, and so the leadership is expected to engage in DEI with their team, with their direct reports. And so what we're hoping is that that does open up some of those doors and some of those prior constraints, but it's kind of yet to be seen how that's going to play itself out. Yeah.
And this is a little bit more of a comment than a question exactly, but kind of goes back, with regards to HR and situations with folks potentially leaving. This person says, what can be revealed or studied are events that arise, and chart them as the frequency of occurrences. In my school, students of color, as their capstone project, listed various issues that indicated bias that they encountered. The school and HR can study these and see what keeps coming up, no names, just issues. Organizationally, if something happens 3 times, it's not about the person, it's about the institution.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great comment, and we do have that. We do that.
Great.
We actually, we've had a committee that came together and looked through all of our bias incidence reports and actually sort of classified. So they weren't tied to an individual, but classified. So we can see the number of occurrences that occur that are based on any particular thing. And actually the Affirmative Action and Equity Office will post that information as well on their website. And so if anyone's just interested in seeing what that looks like for UNH, you can go to that website and look at the bias reporting. So it's updated quarterly, I believe. And so you can see just basically where we are. You can see if things are going up or things are going down and in what areas.
And this is something we touched on a little bit, which is what are some of the ways that UNH is contributing to diversity equity work more broadly in the state of New Hampshire? We talked a little bit about legislature and in the state, but is there other work being done kind of more broadly?
Yeah, so we have an extension program that does excellent work with the community, and particularly with, regards to DEI. I know that extension program, I've met with them a few times. We've had multiple conversations about, what DEI looks like with the SNAP program, with, just the community outreach and so forth. And so the short answer is yes. And I would say that mostly that's being done through that area. There are conversations right now, and I say conversations again, individuals at UNH who are interested in community outreach when it comes to education, so K through 12, right? So outside of the institution, what does DEI look like through K through 12? I had a meeting with the Oyster River superintendent about the curriculum, diversity curriculum. None exists, right? None exists right now. And some of the challenges that superintendents and teachers, educators are facing who are interested in this, because there's no guideline, there's no template, there's nothing for them to go off of. And so there's this desire and this recognition that, we need to do something, we need to do more. We need to start educating our students from that K through 12 pipeline, so they're not getting into college without that skill set. But it has to be built from the ground up, and that's challenging. But so yes, the extension program, corporate extension, conversations I'm having, conversations others are having. There are things in the works, and so within the next few years, my fingers are crossed, and I'm hoping that these things can be developed soon enough, rather soon. And this is not something that can be a one and done, particularly when we're talking about curriculum in a school district, but we're hoping that we can get this going pretty soon. Yeah. Great,
that's awesome. And I know that, New Hampshire Listens here at Carsey, they do a lot of race and equity work in Oyster River and other school districts around, which is not the same as, a more formal curriculum, but definitely.
But it's also an excellent answer to the question, right?
Yeah.
So there are all kinds of, and I'm sure we're forgetting and missing many more. Yeah. As a public institution, we are tied into our community, and certainly that a lot of what we do has to do with the community work and community efforts and community engagement and outreach as well. So in all different areas.
Another question here. When university departments keep turning over BiPOC faculty and staff, what kind of interventions, if any, are done?
Wow, you all are on the ball today.
Yeah.
that is an excellent question. So, and I'm not sure I know how to answer that. So I don't know. That is the honest answer, is I really don't know. So I would say that interventions in the sense of recognizing that the turnover is occurring has happened. And then looking at departments and trying to figure out what can we do differently the next time has happened. And so those would be, I don't know if that's exactly answering your question, but that would be the interventions that I'm aware of. Now, I don't know if there are things happening on an HR level or on a dean or the provost level that I'm not aware of at this particular moment, but so that's the best that I can answer that question.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another UNH person. As a staff member who is not student facing, I find a lot of the education pieces are geared towards staff members who do work directly with students. I want to be part of moving the needle at UNH and in New Hampshire, and was curious if more education focused on being an ally colleagues and constituents was on the education plan. You know, and they're excited that the panels are coming up and some of these other opportunities, and would like more.
Yes. And so the short answer to that question is yes. And so my office has done programming on allyship. I know that Allison Ryder, I keep giving her plugs, she's amazing, is putting together some programming that's centered on, allyship that's tied to white identity and what that means and what that looks like as well. And so there are absolutely opportunities coming forward. And so just be on the lookout. So the opportunities that are specifically tied to the Office of Community Equity and Diversity will be on the webpage. It will be advertised there. So every, once a week or so, just get on that and look to see what's coming up. There are other opportunities I've seen come up, but like I've seen things across the institution, things tied to COLA, things tied to some of the other academic units. But again, I don't know if that would be allyship for anyone who's working with students or not. But again, with our office, it's not student specific necessarily. So just be on the lookout for that because more is coming down the road.
Gotcha. Awesome.
Yeah.
Another question on training. So this person says training's not a one and done. UNH will need to support ongoing refresher programs for everyone. And they ask, why not make it mandatory for all employees?
Yeah, that's the M word. So here's my personal response to that. So mandatory, from my professional experience, mandatory training is not effective. And it's not effective because when you have somebody who's resistant, does not want to be there, then what tends to happen is that they become a disruption to the individuals who do want to be there. And I've seen it time and time again. In order for diversity education or training to be effective, a person has to come with an open and willing mind and an open and willing heart. And that's just really the bottom line. And so, yeah, that would be the reason. That would be the reason I wouldn't make it mandatory. And then there are other reasons, like, how do you make it mandatory for faculty, right? So there are other things in place that would make that even equally more challenging, and so forth and so on. But yeah, it's a tough question. It's a tough question, but that would be the reason why. It's not overall not as useful or effective as one might think.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think we've all been in a situation, whether diversity, equity related or not, where someone was in your group that didn't want to be there, and it never really doesn't add much.
Yeah.
Typically.
Yeah, and it tends to detract from the learners, from those who want to be there, and we don't want to do that either. So
yeah, that makes sense. This is also not a question, but this attendee says the women and gender studies faculty would also be a great resource for bringing social justice into the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So
thank you for that. Yeah.
And another question here. It seems that UNH sometimes has a challenge recruiting and retaining BiPOC and other marginalized groups because the communities these individuals will live in around UNH may not seem welcoming. Can or is the university trying to address that part of the equation?
The community, the general community?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're aware of it. We are aware of it. I'm not sure how much the institution can control, for example, someone's experience in a grocery store, someone's experience when they go to the mall, someone if they have a family with them and they have children that are in the school system, what that looks like, right? And so there's not a whole lot that we can do to shift that out other than to try to offer community-wide education, which we do. We do offer community-wide education, but then we can't mandate who goes. We can't tell, every store owner, if you have own a store, all your employees have to take part in this. So none of that's really on the table or likely or possible. And so in a lot of ways, our hands are tied, and it really is that sort of elephant in the room that makes retention and recruiting complicated and difficult, because it's not just about what we experience as a staff, faculty member, or student at UNH. It really is also about what we experience when we're on our way home, what we experience when we're out in the community and just kind of living our lives. And so that becomes a double-edged sword. Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question and one that we continue to struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. And how, as a country, I think we're struggling to be kind and neighborly, and
Yeah.
We have a question, well, kind of a comment from, it's Representative Charlotte DiLorenzo. Looks like she's in the State House. I'm looking for trainers to educate legislators on diversity and inclusion so that we can understand, appreciate, and support our increasingly diverse constituents. And so it sounds like, you know, we've got some resources coming up, certainly can reach out to you. Is there anything else, any other?
Yeah, so I will say reach out to me directly because we can arrange that.
Great.
Yeah.
Here's another question. How do you see engaging with other institutions in the local community and the Seacoast area? And what are you thinking in terms of ways of sharing resources and learning to enable other institutions beyond UNH to engage in anti-racist action?
Yeah, so collaboration is important and outward engagement is important, and that is something that we're already doing and have been doing. This was happening before I came on board, and I'm sure it will continue to happen down the road, for decades down the road. And so there are a lot of consortiums and committees that various CDOs and diversity leaders on the Seacoast are sitting on, that we come together and meet once a month or once every other week, depending on the committee. And we share best practices. We talk about what's going on. In New Hampshire, there's committees that are not just specific to New Hampshire and also the surrounding New England states as well. And so those opportunities present themselves all the time and keep us grounded and keep us tied into what's happening. There is cross collaboration, even when it comes to job descriptions, right? So there was a cross collaboration with Plymouth on their CDO position, and when that was being created. And so, yes, that is something that occurs and I hope will continue to occur.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Another question here. My question is around the definitions by Ibram Kendi. In one of the statements, it mentions it's not who you are, but what you're doing in the moment. I have seen great football players in Europe who have suffered racist attacks. Is it right for someone to believe they constantly go through this just because of their football profession?
It's an interesting question. That they're going through it just because of their football profession. I would argue that that's not why they're going through it. They're going through it because of their identity, right? Or their perceived identity. And they're going through it because the individuals who are making bad choices in the moment are being racist in that moment, right? So as per Kendi's definition, being racist in that moment. And so they're also going through it because those individuals either have not recognized their racism or have recognized it and just don't care to be anti-racist, because that's a thing too, right? It's not always just about ignorance and not being aware. There are plenty of people who are aware, but are just okay with it. And so they continue on that path. So I wouldn't say it's a football thing. It's just the lived experience of those individuals and the identities that they carry. Whether they're playing football, whether they're playing basketball, whether they're not playing anything, whether they're working, it is just something that as people of color in particular, what we experience in our day-to-day lives. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question here, and we're running towards 9:30, so we'll just do a couple more here. We have a bunch of questions in the queue, so I apologize to some folks who we may not get to them today, but this question here is the age-old question from my time at UNH. Where are we with implementing some type of academic component into the core curriculum for all students around DEI?
We're getting there. And so Faculty Senate has been hard at work on this. And I know that they're very close. The Discovery curriculum is being tweaked and is being looked at to include social justice courses and DEI courses. We're also looking at putting DEI related education in the orientation, the new student orientation programs. And so there's various touch points that students will have for this. I know historically and traditionally at UNH, those touch points, depending on one's major, did not occur until junior year or so, and that's not very helpful for anyone, right? And so we are aware of that, and the changes are being made so that freshmen are in fact encountering these courses before they move on to their being upperclassmen at UNH. And so again, orientation, discovery program, it's already in the works.
Great.
Yeah.
And then, so this person asked, so when campus diversity and inclusion groups are completely denied funding, can we assume it's not a priority?
When they're denied funding?
Yes.
When they're denied funding, can we assume it's not a priority? That's okay. So that's a weighted question. I think I would need to know why, like what the funding is for. Is it funding to exist, or is it funding for an event, or like what is the question pointing towards? It's hard. It's difficult to answer without knowing that.
Yeah, and I would guess sort of related to the earlier talking about the budget, but as you know, the difference between creating a group versus a particular perhaps event or something like that.
Okay, yeah. And so I would say that if that's the case, you know, putting everything else aside, putting like, you know, legalities of the group, or, you know, and again, I don't have all the details, or putting all of that aside, just at its base core, if a student org is trying to get funding and the answer is no, then I would say, yeah, it's just not a value. It's not a priority, because that funding is going to be diverted to something or someone else. You know, without knowing any other information. That's my response.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And okay, so we've just got a few more minutes here, so I will close with this question here. And apologies to all the folks. We've got a whole long list of questions, and I really do appreciate how engaged everyone is. This has been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you, Nadine. This person asks, who will help students who believe they are being treated in a racist manner?
Who will help students who believe they're being treated in a racist manner at UNH? Okay.
My assumption is UNH. They did not write UNH, so
okay.
that's me making an assumption there. But
okay. So again, there are measures in place at UNH for students who are being treated unfairly and inappropriately. Again, the reported system is in place for that. But then for any student who does not want to report or is not comfortable reporting, they can come directly to me. There is advocacy also in the Beauregard Center through Carsey, Owens Velasquez and her team, Lou Farrell as well, and Isaiah. So they have a team that is set up for student advocacy if the comfort level coming to an administrative office isn't there. And so there are various options. There's also, you know, counseling. The counseling services can also work with students who are going through that. But if it's really about getting it, you know, reported and sort of going through that process, and you want to go through that process, and it has to go through the reported system so that it lands in the appropriate offices. And then in a student case, if it's student to student, then the office of Matt Keegan's office would be the office that would, it would land in student life, right? So that would be the office that would take care of it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we are here at 9:29, just wrapping up. I just want to take the last 60 seconds here and say thank you, Nadine, so much for joining us today at Coffee and Conversations. Thank you to everyone who attended. We really appreciate you joining us. We hope that soon enough we can all be back to doing these events in person, but we're so glad you're here with us on Zoom. Please join us next month. We are going to have Shannon Desolets from the New Hampshire's System for Children's Behavioral Health, and she will talk about that program here in the state. So we think that's going to be a really great conversation as well. Coffee and Conversations is a joint effort of the Carsey School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Bureau of Education and Training, and the New Hampshire Certified Association, or the Association of Certified Public Managers. A lot of words, I always mess that up. Thanks again, Nadine. So great to have you here this morning.
Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. Bye, everyone. Have a good morning.
Bye, everybody.